Hello and welcome. I've tried out 49 plugins in this software so far. On some of them I was going in blind, and you can watch my first reactions here on my channel. In this video I'm gonna show you what I noted after the sessions, when I reviewed my footage and did some follow-up testing. The first synths on the list by Arguelles all have one peculiar thing in common. They are all tuned to A equals 435 Hz, which is about 20 cents lower than the standard pitch of 440 Hz. And that's not the only thing that's wrong with them. A less severe issue is that they all sound an octave lower than written. This one is not by choice, but there is a specific technical reason for it. In the very early years of this program, Jeskola bus, the generators could only generate a mono signal. The signal could then be duplicated in a stereo effect and processed in stereo from there on in. Sometime around the year 2000, stereo was added into the program. I'm not a programmer, so I'm not exactly sure about this, but I think what happened was the following. The plugins now have to create a stereo signal, but these old mono synths can't process it forward as stereo. So a stream of two stereo signals left and right becomes two consecutive mono signals, which means that everything sounds an octave lower. The resampling as such is not as noticeable in the synths because the internal computational rate is higher than the output rate, but I'm also pretty sure that everything would have felt faster in 1999. In addition to this involuntary octave transposition, one of the synths, the Guru 5, is also genuinely a transposing instrument that's pitched in F a fifth below. And that's still not all. Tuning octave and key would be a nice package, but there's another thing that can ruin the pitch of these plugins even more, and that's the sample rate. This is another technical issue that only emerged when the support for other sample rates was added to the program years after these plugins had been made. These and many other older plugins derived their pitch from the sample rate, which used to be fixed to 44.1 kHz. And when the sample rate changes, so does the pitch. If you run the program at 48 kHz, the pitch will be changed by a factor of 48 over 44.1, which is 2.5 semitones sharp. This can be a striking experience when you play old files on a new installer of bus that is running at 48 kHz. That's why I've also been keeping an eye out for fine-tuning options. Some of the synths have them, some don't, and for some there are caveats of varying degrees. Let's look at each of the synths in some more detail. The first one is the Arguelles Alpha. It is a synth, obviously, which is additive with two oscillators plus noise and subtractive with a filter unit, although each of the components can also be turned off. I used the word additive in a wider sense here. As with many synths, addition is just one of the mix modes. Notably, the Alpha also includes AM synthesis. It supports 8-track polyphony. The input is nodes, which is kind of mandatory for a synth. And it doesn't use any external sources such as samples from the wavetable, which some synths can do, and obviously samplers do. I've already talked at length about the pitch deviations, but I haven't explained the asterisk on the fine-tuning yet. On this synth, like on quite a few others, only the second oscillator can be fine-tuned. You can turn the first oscillator off here, so it is possible to get fine-tuned sounds out of it, but only with one oscillator plus noise. Good news is that my crash log is empty for this plugin. I haven't observed any crash or major malfunction yet, although I should probably point out that I'm not very far in. And another disclaimer, the sounds you hear now are still from my first session. These are not refined reflections on the synth's capabilities, just basic first impressions. That being said, I actually made a track with the Guru by Arguelles. The original Guru is monophonic, and it doesn't have tuning. The second oscillator can be detuned, but the first oscillator cannot be turned off. The other basic specs are the same, although the controls on the Guru are quite rough and it handles a bit differently. This loop, which is still far in the background right now, was one of my starting points for making test videos. As it was playing, I made one particular observation about the Guru. It is still phasing, very slowly, when the oscillator 2 detune is set to 0. In other words, the 0% value is not exactly 0. But it's so close to 0 that it takes more than 6 minutes to drift apart by one wavelength, which is longer than this entire track. And you can feel the modulation over the course of time, but it is quite elusive, since it is so slow that it never even completes its first cycle. I'm gonna play you a minute or two, and then we got more Gurus to cover. Next up is the Arguelles Guru 2. The Guru 2 has the same stats, but it is a noticeable evolution from the first Guru. This one has a chorus, and there's also better filter control. I recently made this loop that also features the Guru 1 as a combined synth and hi-hat sound. Next, the Arguelles Guru 3. This one supports polyphony up to 4 tracks, and it has a global fine-tuning parameter. The Guru 3 feels different from the previous two, as it has independent oscillators and a more streamlined setup centered around their individual control. Sadly, it is basically made obsolete by the fact that it's very nearly identical to the Guru 4. The Guru 4 has 2 additional filter settings, fat low pass and filter off. The filter off sound can also be heard in the default setting. Except for these 2 additional slider positions, everything else is exactly the same. I do wonder why it's a different machine, because I think it would have been possible to make this a minor version update instead of a separate release. But I could be wrong. The Guru 3 and 4 are the only 2 that are nearly identical, the others all have their own eccentricities. And especially the last in the line, the Arguelles Guru 5. The Guru 5 was the only of these synths that was released in early 2000, and it's a very different beast. It's much larger than the other ones, and it has some groovy modular-like mapping with 2 envelopes and 2 LFOs. The polyphony is extended to 8 tracks, but global fine-tuning disappears again. It only has fine-tuning for oscillator 2, which can be used on its own, like on the Alpha. Unlike any other synth by Arguelles, the Guru 5 transposes to F, a fifth below the written pitch. So there's already a lot going on. And unfortunately it's also the first of the bunch on which I've experienced technical difficulties. It happened to me quite a few times that the Guru 5 didn't produce any sound when I loaded it up. Next is the Arguelles kAway, or is it kAway? On paper this looks similar, but the kAway is more additive. It has 7 oscillators that are always added. Each of the oscillators can be individually fine-tuned, so in principle global fine-tuning is also no problem. You would just have to move 7 sliders. Like the others before, the kAway does have a filter, so technically by my current metric it is also additive subtractive. It just has more additiveness. In my teenage years I've used it for emotronica. The less additive complement to the kAway is the Arguelles kSynth. Again, the technical stats are basically the same, except that the kSynth has a global fine-tuning parameter. But it is set up very differently, with speed values for the oscillators and a synth mode selector. As I was preparing for this video, I noticed that the synth modes cause sound glitches. The glitches also stay in the signal when the sliders are returned to the original position, until the preset is reloaded, or, as I found out later, the cutoff slider is moved. None of the other sliders will do though, it has to be the cutoff. It has something to do with the filter, obviously, in conjunction with the envelope smoothing, which is the slider at the bottom, and other processes. I think it only happens on filter type 0, but not always. It doesn't happen on the Relaxo Hard preset, which also uses type 0. 2 more synths to go, and it's finally time for the TB3003. The Arguelles TB3003 is the first of several 303 clones in Jeskola bus. I think there's at least 4. Being a 303, this is not an additive synth, it only has one oscillator, with either a saw or a square wave, like on a 303. It's monophonic and it doesn't have fine-tuning control, which is authentic. But there is one feature that it adds, and that's chords. You can play the 3003 with chord voicings from a selection of chord figures. So while it is monophonic in terms of tracks, you could play certain chords with it, and it could reasonably be used for block chord accompaniment, so that's worth noting. It does not have glide or accent triggers, so it is a bit limited in terms of acid, but I found it fun to work with. In this track, I stumbled over a chord voicing that I really liked, with this line that otherwise really doesn't do much.
I'm bulletproof, okay? You can't burn me, you can't blast me, and you can't break me.
The last synth for this video, and alphabetically the last by Arguelles, is the TB4004. The TB4004 is mostly like the 3003, but it adds fine-tuning. It also has a few other new parameters that make it sound even less like a 303, which is an interesting route to go. There's more chords, including a Venga voice chord, pulse width control, and a sine wave. I've used it here in the preliminary arrangement that emerged from session number 4, Acid 4004. The acid line is a 3003, the synth lead is a 4004. these were all the synths by Arguelles for Jeskola bass. I hope you enjoyed this presentation. I might do a sequel covering the next synths in the alphabet. And there's also the other generator plugins, the control devices, and eventually the effects. More will be to come. You can watch new episodes of my first synth tests most weeks on my channel. Sometimes I'll do something else. This final track is one of the first tracks I ever made. It's from 25 years ago, and it also features a 3003, a 4004, and a Guru 4. Thank you for your attention in this matter. I am Synthwork. See you soon.